Welcome to the Saturday Cadence podcast. I'm Blake Biscardi, and remember, the Saturday Cadence podcast is the heartbeat of college football. Auburn has fired Hugh Freeze, so yet another coach has been plagued to this carousel that just keeps spinning faster and faster, becoming more wild by the day. The college football playoff rankings came out. Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M were the top three teams widely anticipated. But we're going to break it down and what it means for the college football playoff picture, what surprised us, what did not, and then how we can project some of these teams moving forward. All of that for you, plus a big Week 11 slate for you. Welcome into Saturday Cadence. My name is Blake Biscardi, David Wertheim, Grant Kincaid, both alongside today. David, like I just said, those college football playoff rankings came out. We see the Buckeyes, Hoosiers, and Aggies sitting at the top. And then we're looking at teams like Oregon at 9. We've got Georgia Tech and Miami 17 and 18. Then we have this backfill of Big Ten teams toward the bottom. We have Iowa, Michigan, and Washington at 20, 21, and 23. Those stood out to me. But what stood out to you in these rankings?
Yeah, I wasn't super surprised, honestly. I thought that Oregon at 9 was a little funky. The committee must not value their wins. Obviously, they're a one-loss team. That one loss coming to the team that's ranked number 2. So the committee must not really be valuing their wins. Interesting to see where the ACC teams fell in there, a little lower than I expected. I thought they might try and prop one of those teams up. They didn't really. Obviously, if the season were to end today, they'll still get a bid with Virginia in there at 11. But kind of similar to last year with that conference, right? Clemson kind of snuck in there as the 12th team. So pretty interesting to see that in back-to-back years from how the ACC is trending currently. Obviously, Miami and Clemson were both projected to be probably in this initial 12-team bracket, but neither of them really that close. Clemson, obviously, no chance. Miami with a very light chance to get in. And then, top 3, Ohio State, Indiana, Texas A&M. No surprise there. Could have been really any order. I wouldn't have been mad about any order. I think it would have been fair. And obviously, it'll play it out on the field. So no real surprises. I thought they got it right. Texas over Oklahoma. Texas Tech at 8 makes sense. So, I think they got it right.
Yeah, I think, like Dave said, Oregon obviously kind of seeing that domino effect of Penn State's season, losing at home to Indiana, and then their marquee win and ending up being Penn State. Kind of have that, definitely having a rippling effect throughout college football. And then Texas and Oklahoma, a couple interesting rankings, obviously because Texas a lot higher ranked in the AP poll. So the committee is valuing Texas, and I think valuing Texas is valuing Ohio State's schedule. I think there are some people saying Ohio State hasn't really played anybody, and you can't really count Texas. And I think you're seeing the committee value that win and value Texas as a team, especially with the way they're ranking them with Oklahoma right now. So overall, like Dave said, there's nothing too crazy. Everything makes, a good amount of sense. And it is fun to see the Mormons versus Catholics potential matchup there.
Grant, you're mentioning a team like Texas. I actually want to center in on 10 through 12 here, and that's going to be Notre Dame, Texas, and Oklahoma. And David, I'm going to bring this question to you. Notre Dame is sitting 8 spots higher than Miami, the team that beat them. So there was a wide belief out there Miami should be ranked ahead of Notre Dame because of that head-to-head victory. And while I agree with that, there is criteria in the playoff committee's bylaws where they can say, hey, this team is unequivocally better than them. And then that head-to-head only comes into play if they're in a cluster. And clearly being ranked 10th and 18th, those two teams were not in a cluster nor considered one next to the other. So my question here is, of Notre Dame, Texas, and Oklahoma, Notre Dame being the highest ranked, yet doesn't have a conference championship game to play in. It's also unlikely Texas and Oklahoma make it to Atlanta. Which of those teams has the best chance and which team has the worst chance at making the bracket because of Virginia being lower, no G5 team ranked? That cutoff line is there where Texas and Oklahoma are the first 2 teams out. So that means Notre Dame would be the last team in, and then you would have Texas and Oklahoma on the outside. Is that how you would see that? Or do you have a different perspective here as we're looking down the schedule? Texas has the biggest games left, being at Georgia and home against A&M.
Yeah, I mean, if Texas wins out, they're in. I mean, I think that's not even a question. Obviously, 2 losses, 1 to Ohio State. That one probably gets forgiven. The Florida loss is really tough. That one probably does not. But I mean, look, if they beat Oklahoma, if they beat Alabama, excuse me, if they beat Georgia, if they already beat Vanderbilt, they're going to be in, right? I mean, they're going to be in. If they beat Texas A&M on the last game of the season, they're going to be in. Um, so I think Texas, assuming they win out, if they win out, which is a tall task, has the best chance. I would say Oklahoma would probably be the team on the outside looking in. Obviously, they have that head-to-head loss against Texas. Notre Dame's been very impressive as of late. But Oklahoma, I mean, look, they got another chance next week against Alabama, where they can turn the tides, no pun intended, of their season and really put themselves in good position to make the playoff with wins over Missouri and LSU at home to wrap up the year. So, if Oklahoma and Texas can both win out, it'd be a hard argument for me to leave them out. And then you start getting into the conversations about Alabama, where they lost to Florida State, and then Oklahoma in this scenario. So that would really where things get interesting. But as it stands right now, if Texas wins out, they're in for me for sure. If Oklahoma wins out, they're in for me for sure. If Notre Dame wins out and Texas and Oklahoma win out, I'm not sure they get in. So certainly some interesting storylines to follow with those three teams.
David, I'm going to ask you a follow-up to that question now. We said Georgia and Texas A&M, one on the road, one at home for the Longhorns. Those are the remaining games. You mentioned Oklahoma having Alabama. They followed that with Missouri and then LSU. In the world that both of those teams become 9-3, or let's say one of them becomes 9-3, will one of Texas or Oklahoma have an argument to be in at 9-3?
Yeah, I think it would be tough to put an argument in for either of those teams with three losses. Obviously, you would look at Texas in that scenario, and that loss to Florida probably comes back up to the surface. You wouldn't really be able to forgive a third loss like that in that scenario. You might be able to get away with it with only two losses. You can forgive the Ohio State one. And then Oklahoma, kind of the same thing. Three losses, just a little too much, even though in theory, if they lose to Alabama, they'd have three good losses. Um, but three good losses probably isn't enough in this bracket. You look at last year, for example, obviously we only have 1 year of a 12-team playoff to go back on, but Clemson was the only three-loss team that made it, and they had 10 wins coming in with that 10th win from the ACC. Obviously, that wouldn't be an opportunity for Texas or Oklahoma, and as such, I think they'd be missing out with three losses.
Grant, let's look at some of these matchups that we would have hypothetically if the playoffs started today. I think the thing that stands out to me was the role reversal from last year. Ohio State being the number one overall seed, they would be in Pasadena, and then Oregon having the 8-9 game. This time, though, Oregon being the 9 seed instead of the 8 seed, still winning that game, meaning they get to go play Ohio State in the Rose Bowl. So what a storyline that would be if there's a rematch in Pasadena between the Buckeyes and the Ducks after that bludgeoning last year where Ohio State just ran Oregon out of the building. And then I think another one down here, you're looking at Notre Dame, BYU. That bottom part of the bracket seems to be the most favorable path to the championship game. So Notre Dame gets a win there over BYU. They would have Indiana, another rematch from last year. And then you're getting right into the semifinals there. Did any of those matchups stand out to you? What are your thoughts on those?
No, yeah, I think it is, it's very intriguing to already have a potential Ohio State Oregon matchup in the Rose Bowl. Obviously, like you said, the role reversal with Ohio State taking up that number one overall seed. But man, I got to think if you're Dan Lanning, after losing at home to Indiana, finding out also that Penn State isn't the team that you thought they were. Obviously Lanning is an extremely confident guy and a great coach, but if that were to happen, if that collision with Ohio State were to happen with a defense that seems more improved with Matt Patricia, um, that would be a very interesting game for Oregon and Dan Lanning, to say the least. Obviously, Ohio State wouldn't be out of the water. Oregon's a great team, but it would be very intriguing matchup, no doubt. And then, like you said, Notre Dame, BYU, down there in the area of the bracket where there's probably more question marks, more teams where you might be able to sneak by and win the game, win that semifinal game to be able to play. As of now, Ohio State in the championship, I'm sure that's the favorite, but there's a lot of obviously parity, which is the word of college football these days, with that unranked Memphis in there, and UVA, although they're a different ranking, they're all of a sudden in the mix. But like you said, there's a lot of teams that you wouldn't expect to see this late in the year, deep in the mix.
Grant, my follow-up question to you on this: does the number one overall seed still, even with the format changes taking away the automatic buys, does the number one seed still have the most difficult path?
Man, it is tough because, obviously last year we saw what happened to Oregon after the season they put together. And, Dan Lanning obviously was ad nauseum about that and people all over Twitter. But, at the end of the day, if you're the number one overall seed and you're the best team, we saw it with Ohio State. They lost to Oregon. They lost at home to Michigan. But they were the best team and they proved it, in the 4 games in the playoff. You can make every excuse you want, but when the talent is on the field and if the coaching is sound enough, you're going to take care of business. And then, having a number one overall seed, at the end of the day, it shouldn't. It's not going to be the hardest path. It just shouldn't be. And even though Oregon had a tough break, just because Ohio State happened to lose a game that they weren't supposed to, I think it's still worth having the number one overall seed.
No, absolutely. It's just a fun talking point too, because you're looking at this bracket and of the draws that would happen, Ohio State would have the most difficult as the number one overall seed. But your point is exactly right. There should not be an excuse if you're the number one overall seed and you're the number one team in the country and you're the best team in the country. You should be able to prove that on the field, and it should not matter about your opponent. And Ryan Day has said that from the beginning of this season, that they're not defending anything that they're attacking and that they haven't won anything yet. And it's about them. It's not about their opponent. It's about their preparation, their work, and their game on their terms. We saw that happen in the second half against Penn State. After that late first half turnover leading to a Nittany Lion touchdown, Ohio State responded well, and they ended up blowing out Penn State in the second half. But if we move, Grant, now staying in the Big Ten, but just moving to a little bit of a look ahead to this game this Saturday, Oregon at Iowa. That's a tough matchup now for the Ducks. Iowa sitting at 6-2. They are ranked 20th according to the selection committee, which I think is a very big deal for Iowa to be ranked. It's good for the Big Ten. But this game for Oregon is not a walk in the park, and I actually do think the Ducks are on upset alert here. Iowa has a great defense. Oregon's coming across the country. Granted, not coast to coast. They still have to make that flight across time zones. And this is their first trip at Kinnick. It's in November. It's a 3:30 kick. When you look at a matchup setting up this way, you know the horrors that happen for top-ranked teams at Kinnick. What stands out to you here? Because, Grant, I think that there's an at-large bid on the line here in this game. I don't know that Oregon's going to be able to get in at 10-2. I think they'd have a chance. I just don't think it would be likely. They would need a lot of help, meaning if Texas and Oklahoma both lose a game, they go to 9-3 or something along those lines. But I do think that Iowa, if they can win out and finish 10-2, that they would have an argument getting a win here over Oregon.
Yeah, I think we kind of highlighted it earlier with, seeing how the committee valued Iowa. It gives them an opening, like you said, at the at large bid, especially being in the Big Ten, and now having this opportunity against a team like Iowa that's ranked in the top 10. They're only a one-loss team, but they also, like all of us have mentioned, they haven't had a win that would, make us think that they're a team that could just fly through Iowa. So you're exactly right. Kinnick, anytime other than noon, against a team like Oregon, that crowd is going to be unreal. And like you said, it's Oregon's first experience. Obviously, they're used to Autzen, but there's just something about Kinnick that, teams that aren't prepared for it, it can eat you alive. And Iowa has a team and maybe just a competent enough offense that could pull off the opposite.
And that's the thing, Grant, too, is if you can hold Oregon like Indiana did to 20 points, Iowa maybe needs to hold them to about 17, I would say. I think 21 points would win this game, to be honest with you. I mean, you're looking at a Mark Gronowski. He hasn't thrown for 1,000 yards yet. I mean, we know that Iowa is a stranger to
a
offense.
Fest. Yes.
Right. They are a stranger to offense. It's not its normal thing. Sure. Is their passing attack a little bit better than this year? Yes. But the hallmarks of that program are defense and running the football. They've been physical. This is going to be a game that's in November, so it's going to mean more, just like you said about the crowd. I think it's going to be one of the better environments in the country this weekend, and that's including Alabama, LSU. I really think that Iowa crowd's going to show up. That game is going to mean something to those players and that fans. Not that it doesn't every other week, but Oregon's going to get a little bit of taste of that, the heartland of the Big Ten, and seeing what it's like going to play at Kinnick in November. And that's why I put them on upset alert. But something that you said, Grant, in the beginning about Oregon, where you said their benchmark victory was about against Penn State. And now all of a sudden, Penn State's not been that good. So it's almost like that reflection moment where, okay, if we look in the mirror, how good are we? So, Grant, that's the question I want to ask you. How good is Oregon?
I mean, that is, it is a great question because, like you said, particularly this past week, albeit it's Penn State playing without Drew Aller, and the overall kind of morale of that team has to be just in the ground at this point. But we've seen Penn State drop five straight, and against any good team, just be suffocated. So then you kind of look back at that game. You look back at Oregon. They were. I mean, Penn State was up and down the field in that second half, and obviously it went into what was a double overtime. Oregon had their hands full, and albeit on the road at night, it's not an easy environment to play. But you all of a sudden compare that one with all the rest of their schedule, and you can't say that they are a team that is, worthy of being a top five team. And I think that's why, when we went through the rankings earlier and we see them at 9, I think that's why the committee, that's kind of how the committee was thinking is we got to see more. And this is their opportunity against Iowa.
I think you're absolutely right. It's a wait and see mode for the Ducks. I think they're a good team, and they gave them the opportunity to get a marquee victory. Iowa being ranked 20th. I think the Hawkeyes have been underranked for the last couple of weeks. They should have been in the AP poll, but we know the problems we have with those voters. But let's transition, Grant, to a huge game in the Big 12. This is the headliner game of the week. This is going to mean something in that conference race, the college football playoff race. We've got BYU at Texas Tech, a battle of 8-0 and 8-1 teams. BYU right now is leading the conference. Texas Tech, though, still the betting favorite. If you're checking in Vegas for that, Baron Morton has been outstanding, but Bear Backmeyer has been just as good for BYU. So when you look at these two games, I think you see, yes, there's some good offenses here, but I think there's a big edge for Texas Tech on defense because that is one of the better defenses in the country. This game is going to be for the driver's seat in the Big 12. And I think it's also going to have massive college football playoff implications, which obviously it's widely known, but seeding is going to be very important because the Big 12, the way these teams are positioned, you're trying to become a multi-bid league. So right now, if you're a Big 12 fan or you want the Big 12 to get multiple teams in that field, you almost want Texas Tech to win that game. Both teams now have a loss, and then you get a rematch in the conference championship game and hope those teams are ranked high enough to where the loser doesn't fall out. So when you see this game, what storyline is sticking out to you?
Well, first off, what an amazing game to kick off the weekend at noon. 8-0 versus 8-1, 7-8 for all the marbles in the Big 12. So that's going to be an incredible game to watch. But this, I think, parlaying off of what you said, Texas Tech, that defense, specifically that defensive line, at home being able to pin their ears back against the BYU team that has been phenomenal. I mean, you can't knock them. It's BYU is every week. It's like, well, the magic's going to run out. And they really they impress week in and week out. This week I think there's a reason why the odds makers have it. Texas Tech. I think that defense will be suffocating at home, and I think it's going to be tough for BYU to continue what they have done. That being said, like you said, the potential for whoever loses, maybe Tech suffers that second loss, and then all of a sudden you have BYU looking like this, not only the front runner in the Big 12, but they're flying up the college football rankings, and then Texas Tech with all this money has 2 losses in the Big 12, and then you're thinking, well, Texas Tech even going to make the playoff. So it's an enormous game. It's so late in the year, and the Big 12, all of a sudden this is an enormous game because of the playoff implication.
And Grant, too, one of the things when you look at these rankings is you notice the Big Ten and the SEC sitting very heavy in those top six teams. I think one of the battles that's going to happen is, can a team get one of those top four bids to have a bye that's not in those two conferences? And when you look around, the ACC not really playing well as a conference. They don't have a top tier contender. I think they have some playoff caliber teams for at large spots. I don't see a team in the ACC that jumps out to me. It's like, oh man, that team can win a national title at this point. Now, we have a month of data that we're still going to have, and this is the time to prove it because the games you remember are played in November. But for the Big 12, I think right now, if I'm saying, okay, what teams could get into that top four to get a bye? And I have to look at BYU. I have to look at Texas Tech. And then I don't know that I could consider Notre Dame. That's the thing for me. I think there's too many good teams in the Big Ten and the SEC. So do you think that the winner of this game could position itself to get into the top four should they run the table and win out? I think BYU being undefeated would have the best chance, but these teams are ranked 7th and 8th. So Texas Tech gets a win. I think they would have just a slightly less chance because of that one in the loss column compared to being undefeated. But how would you see that shaking out? Do you think that there is a potential for the Big Ten or SEC to give up one of those top 4 seeds and the bye week in the first round of the playoff?
I think it would have to be BYU, not only because, like you said, they would have no losses in the column, but if they pulled off this game, it would objectively be a much bigger win for them. On top of it, probably the win that would possibly catapult them into the playoff, assuming they won out and won the Big 12 championship and everything else. But I think Tech, that loss to Arizona State is just going to sting. Arizona State isn't what they were last year. And, obviously we didn't expect Tech to be perfect. But if you're talking about being able to take one of those spots from the Big Ten and so on and so forth, you can't have a loss, especially being in the Big Ten, to a team like Arizona State. But BYU, I think that is in front of them right now, and that is a huge storyline for them as well.
It absolutely is. And I think you just look around and we know the super conferences that are the Big Ten and the SEC. And you see who can take a spot from those two teams. Is this what's going to be the new trend every year, that those top 4 seeds are from those two conferences? Or are we going to have another conference or an independent like Notre Dame be able to steal one of them from them? So like you said, a huge storyline for BYU. I think it's in their sights, but I do think that they're going to need a little bit of help. And now they do get some head-to-head matchups in there with teams ahead of them. But again, it's a big thing to watch. And I do think that it's possible. But BYU is going to need to find some matchup advantages and find a weakness really in the Texas Tech defense. And I think they're going to have to do that with their running game. But truthfully, when I see this matchup, I think BYU has to be +2 in the turnover battle to have a chance to pull the upset. This is a big point spread game. It's 10.5, bigger than I thought it would be. So normally that leads me to want to take the underdog in that sense. But then I started looking into this game a little bit more, and I don't have any disrespect to go BYU's way. I just respect Texas Tech because in their loss, Baron Morton was not playing, and he is playing in this game. So I think BYU is going to need to be +2 in the turnover battle to really have a legitimate shot in this one on Saturday. But Grant, 2 games real quick are standing out to me for teams that could be on upset alert. That is LSU at Alabama. The Tide are favored by 9.5. We're going to pick this game here in a minute, but I think right now, before we even get there, that LSU has fired Brian Kelly. I think we're going to see a lot of juice from LSU, probably the most we've seen all season. Salvage that. It's a rivalry game, just like we saw with Penn State coming into Columbus to play Ohio State. I mean, if there's anything left in that program, this is the same spot. You're going to find out. I do think that there's something left. So I think Alabama needs to be on guard here, especially both teams coming out of the bye week. And then the game we talked about a lot already is Oregon at Iowa. I think the Ducks are also on upset alert. Any other games across the slate standing out to you? Do you agree with those two? Where are you at with the upset meter this week?
It certainly is the one game that LSU is looking at on their schedule, considering the way their season is going. like you said, it is the Penn State at Ohio State's. What juice do you have left? What effort can you show, make the fan base proud? So I definitely think LSU, that line sitting at 9.5, probably a little more than I would take right now. I think Alabama's really good, but when it creeps up to 10 and it's LSU Alabama, I don't know. As far as other games in the upset meter, obviously we covered Oregon and Iowa is a huge one. I wouldn't be too worried about Ohio State at Purdue from what I've seen, this season. I think UVA on any given week is, probably an upset watch. So, maybe if you're looking at that, obviously, A&M traveling on the road this week to Missouri, you never know what the drink is going to cook up. Uh, so I think that, maybe those two matchups would be ones that I'd say, the ones that could shake up the playoff picture. Right.
All right, Grant, I'm with you with Virginia. I think they do need to be on watch too. But let's go ahead and get into the Saturday 7 picks here. And we're going to start with Indiana favored by 14.5 at Penn State. Penn State, again, reeling 5 straight losses. Do they make it 6 or do they get a win at home? Indiana historically terrible in state college. Now, Indiana has never had a team like they're going to put on the field on Saturday. But how do you see this game playing out with the Hoosiers being 14.5-point favorites?
It's definitely kind of a surreal sight seeing Indiana more than 14-point favorites at Penn State. But that's where we are. And I think, obviously Penn State gave a lot last week, particularly in that first half. But at home, maybe that gives them a little more juice. Maybe, seeing Indiana and not Ohio State on the other side, gives them a little more of a confidence in that game. I don't know if I could take Indiana 14.5 right now. But I could also see Indiana winning this game by 3 or 4 touchdowns. So I'm gonna lean with my gut. I'm gonna take Indiana to cover that. Uh, I just think Penn State is in a place where they're lost. So that would be my pick.
I'm with you on that. I think in your mind you can justify it because you're trying to recalibrate yourself for this season with Penn State having 5 losses, losing their head coach, starting quarterback, and no national championship, maybe not even a bowl game in its sights. And Indiana being the second ranked team in the country, arguably number 1, depending on who you ask, and they look complete. So I want to think that Penn State can be competitive in this game. I just don't see any data or evidence to prove that they will be. Now, they can prove me wrong and they would do it, and I wouldn't be shocked. But from what I have seen on the field, what I saw in that second half against Ohio State in Ohio Stadium on Saturday, I'm going to take Indiana, and I think they're going to win, and they think they're going to cover. Texas A&M favored by 6.5 at Missouri is the next game on the slate. Tricky spot for A&M being on the road here against the Tigers. Eli Drinkwitz, we'll see what he can cook up. His name's starting to get floated around the Penn State job. We'll see how that all shakes out. Mike Elko, also another name floating around. So this could be the battle of hypothetical Penn State coaches. Grant, how do you see this game playing out on Saturday?
I think it's a really intriguing matchup, especially with the season that A&M is having and the potential that they have. Being a high seed and playing deep in the college football playoff. Elko has them playing at an elite level. Marcel Reed obviously doing what he does. But Drinkowitz, when he has teams at home, he can do any given Saturday. That guy can pull off an upset. So I think obviously I said this is one to look for. But at 6.5, the way A&M's playing, um, the way that Elko is coaching, I think I would have to take A&M to cover that right now.
I've been back and forth on this game too because I like what Marcel Reed's doing, but then I remember that there's times where A&M has given up 40 points this year, and I look at that and I said, you know what? This is a big game for Drinkwitz in Missouri, especially at home. A little bit of a redemption spot. Maybe they thought the Alabama game slipped through their fingers. I'm going to take Missouri to cover in this game. So give me Eli Drinkwitz and the Tigers. Auburn at Vanderbilt, another tricky spot here. Auburn just losing their head coach. Vanderbilt favored by 6.5. Have the game at home. Grant, who do you like?
I like Vandy. They're just obviously they're not losing a coach, and they get to come back home. kind of lick their wounds a little bit, and I think they cover and beat Auburn.
I'm with you on that one. I think Vanderbilt's going to win this game comfortably. Wake Forest at Virginia, Grant. This is a game you talked about in the upset segment. Virginia favored by 6.5 in this matchup. This game is at home, but can Wake Forest have any magic here on the road?
Yeah, I mean, I truly think that they can. If you're ranked as high as UVA is, and you're only favored by 6.5 at home against Wake Forest, there is a reason why every week you're on upset watch, and I think any given week the talent gap is not far enough for UVA to comfortably win. I don't, I just don't know enough about Wake Forest attack. I don't think they're gonna, obviously UVA has put together a complete season. They're a well-coached team and they're an experienced team. So I think that'll count for something. And I think that, I think that UVA will win. Uh, but I don't think they're going to cover. I think Wake Forest is going to keep this one close.
Yeah, it's tough to go back and forth on this game, just with Virginia kind of flirting with some upset losses, then also looking really good. I think they've had an up and down season. It depends what team shows up. I'm going to take Virginia to cover because they're at home. I think they can win the game by a touchdown. So go ahead and give me the Cavaliers here. Ohio State Purdue is the next game on the schedule. 1 o'clock start in Ross-Ade Stadium. The Buckeyes favored by 29.5. Grant, since the loss to Michigan, Ohio State has not failed to cover the spread. There has been one push, but they have yet to fail to cover the spread. Again, 29.5 point favorites for the Buckeyes on the road.
Yeah, I think this was a different era in college football and specifically Purdue football. I might be worried, and if Sayan and the defense weren't playing at the level that they are right now, I might be a little more worried. But there's a reason why Ohio State is favored by 30 points. There's no slowing down for this team right now. It is a big number, but I think by the end of the game, Ohio State covers it.
I'm with you on that game. I think this is not like those games where Ohio State, as a highly ranked team, goes in to the house of horrors that is Ross-Ade Stadium. I'm going to take Ohio State to win. I'm going to take Ohio State to cover. And I think the Buckeyes keep rolling. Oregon at Iowa. The Ducks are 6.5 point favorites. Second to last game on our board. Highly impactful in the Big Ten race and the college football playoff at large race. Grant, who do you like?
Uh, Immediately, I like Iowa to cover this game. I don't think Oregon is a team that can start running away from, a team like Iowa, a team that can slow it down, is solid on defense. With that crowd, it's going to be hard for Oregon to do maybe what they thought they could do, what they did against Penn State, because, this is a different team. This is an Iowa team that's probably better than Penn State, at this juncture. So I don't think or I don't, pardon me, I don't think Oregon's going to be able to cover that. And I wouldn't be surprised if they drop the game. I'm going to take Iowa here.
I do think Oregon loses one more game. I just don't know if it's this week. They've got USC and Washington still on the schedule. I think Oregon's going to win the game. I'm going to take them to cover. I'm not going to be surprised, though, if Iowa does. I'm not going to be surprised, Grant. I'm just looking at this and thinking Dan Lanning might feel slighted, backs a little bit against the wall. They've got to have the game. I think
Right.
they've got the players. But again, I don't have a good feel on this game either way. I'm just going to take the proven commodity and Dan Lanning in Oregon over Iowa just for that reason. I do respect Iowa. I think they're a great team. I think they've been playing a lot better this season, but I'm going to reluctantly and hesitantly take Oregon here to win the game and cover. LSU,
Yeah.
Alabama, final game of the week here. This game is played in Tuscaloosa. 9.5 point favorites are the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, it's like I said earlier, it's a pretty big number for Alabama LSU, but obviously LSU is going through it right now, and their whole athletic department seems to be at kind of a disarray. But um, I digress there. LSU Nussmeier, I think Nussmeier probably at this point has the most to prove. He's the guy that came back to improve his draft stock, and all of a sudden, his team season around him has fell apart, and you can blame that partially on him, but um, he's got to prove something, and what a stage to do that. I think it's entirely possible that LSU can keep it within the number. Uh, but the more I think about Alabama at home, you know, with Ty Simpson and a defense that looks a lot more like an Alabama defense, I don't think LSU is going to be able to keep it with that number. I think Alabama continues to roll, and I think Alabama's a contender right now.
Yeah, Grant, there's two things that can happen in this game, and I know it's the obvious, so just bear with me. As I said, LSU's either going to roll over or are they going to play with a lot of juice? Doesn't guarantee a win, but I do think they're going to play with a lot of juice. Again, rivalry game. I'm going to take LSU to cover. I think Alabama's going to win the game, probably by a touchdown, 9.5 to me. I think LSU can cover that just out of that desperation mode. Hey, we're going to prove it to you, and kind of wipe the slate clean from Brian Kelly and start new and fresh right now. So I'm going to go ahead and take LSU, and I think Alabama wins the game, though. But Grant, winding down the show, what are your closing thoughts here as we head into week 11? We now see the first iteration of this year's college football playoff rankings. So that race is starting to take more of a true form now that we have those official rankings here.
Yeah, I think, like we said, the committee got it right for the most part. There was, spots here and there, like we said, Oregon and Texas, a couple interesting rankings. But as we come to this final month of the season, and specifically this weekend, team seasons are being decided. We're officially at that part of the season. There's a reason why the rankings are coming out. These games matter astronomically, and we've been talking about teams like UVA and Memphis, and countless other teams having legitimate shots at the college football playoff. So I think that's just with the rankings come out, it's just another way to kind of highlight what makes this so exciting, that we're 4 weeks out from the season and these games are monumental for teams like a Texas Tech and a BYU. It's a whole new era of college football, and it's fun to watch it unfold. I can't wait to watch.
Yeah, it's provided a lot of great extra games. Like Iowa is now relevant here in November, having a chance to potentially have a large bid. Michigan and Washington are both going to have chances against their rivals to have a chance for a win and in situation as at large teams to end the season. I mean, there's a ton of storylines here. Texas and Oklahoma potentially getting in at 9-3 teams. I mean, there are so many possibilities. So a lot of teams are in contention, and that's part of the benefits of this format. So again, this is the second year of it. Still going to work out the kinks and everything else, but there's a lot of teams in contention. A lot more games matter. And this is going to be another great slate this weekend as we get into the teeth of this November schedule. So all these results matter, but now they matter more. So I'm really excited to watch these games on Saturday and have another week under our belt and move another step closer to the second version of the 12-team playoff here. So guys, thank you so much for listening to the show today. Make sure you're continuing to follow us on social media at Saturday Cadence and at T Silver Bulletin. And then you can find us on our website, tsilverbulletin.com. We appreciate you guys for checking out all of our coverage. Make sure you're heading over to the YouTube channel at Saturday Cadence for some behind-the-scenes looks. I'm working the Woody Hayes Athletic Center covering Ohio State. Guys, again, appreciate you listening to the show. Enjoy the weekend of college football. God bless.